Welcome to the Propertybuyer Podcast, where we explore the world of residential and commercial real estate to help you make better decisions about buying, selling, or investing in all types of property. Join me, Rich Harvey, CEO of propertybuyer.com.au and multi-award-winning buyer's advocate. Our podcast features expert interviews, market trends and insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of Australian real estate. Whether you're a home buyer, a seasoned property investor, commercial buyer, developer, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge, strategies, and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Well, welcome to another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast, where we bring you expert insights to help you make smarter property decisions. I'm your host, Rich Harvey, and today we're diving into one of the most exciting and fast-growing property markets in the country, and that is Western Sydney. With the upcoming Western Sydney Airport, major infrastructure projects, and a changing demographic landscape, this region is brimming with opportunity for home buyers and investors alike. But where exactly should you be looking? What suburbs are set for the biggest price growth? And how can you get ahead of the market before the competition heats up? We'll be covering everything from the impact of new infrastructure to the best suburbs for investment, as well as some key strategies to help you make the most of the current market conditions. So whether you're a first home buyer, a seasoned investor, or just curious about what's happening in Western Sydney, this episode is for you. To help us unpack all of this, I'm joined by a true expert in the field, Mark Vella from Starr Partners. Now, Mark is a highly accomplished real estate professional. He's got over 16 years experience specialising in Western Sydney. As a director and a top sales agent at Starr Partners, he's consistently been recognised as Auction Lister of the Year and also Salesperson of the Year. As a lifelong local, Mark possesses a deep knowledge of the market's trends and its investment potential. He's passionate about community engagement. He actively supports local events and organisations and schools. And outside of work, he enjoys spending time with his wife and 4 kids, motorbike riding and watching rugby league. Mark, great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, mate.
So tell me, who do you support in the rugby league?
It's a sad admission, mate, but it's the Parramatta Eels.
Oh, good on you, mate. Fantastic.
It's a tough gig for us supporters.
Long time coming, mate. They'll have to make a comeback one of these days.
Good, mate, they have to. Hopefully it's in my lifetime.
Exactly, mate. Never give up hope. Never give up, mate. Mark, we've got a little tradition with our podcast, and I'm going to throw you just a little philosophical not a question, but a quote, and just love to get your reaction to this. And
yeah, of course.
It's a Chinese proverb which says, the person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person who is doing it. What do you take from that quote?
Mate, it's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look, for me, it resonates in my life, I'll be honest with you. Having 4 kids, there's obviously a lot of challenges, a lot of things that I do that most people say that you can't do. But for me, I think something like that, what that says to me is that the things in life that bring the biggest rewards are probably not done without some element of risk and hard work. And it's sometimes the naysayers in life that try to tell you you can't just because they haven't got the guts to do it themselves.
Exactly.
That's where it hits me, that one.
Yeah, no, that's good. I really like that. I mean, it's often your family or friends or those closest to you. Oh, don't try that. That's too difficult. But honestly, they're not necessarily your best support team. So it's.
Mate, can I give you one example on that?
Yeah.
And this is really how that proverb resonates with me. I like to try and holiday as much as I can. It's one of the conscious efforts I make in recent times anyway. And most people are like, how are you going to go on holiday with 4 kids? My eldest is 7, my youngest are about to turn 5 tomorrow, actually. And like, how do you do it? Like, as if you do that, it's just craziness. You can't even enjoy your holiday. I'm like, well, why would I avoid going on holiday and the joy that brings me because it's hard? Like, I've never shied away from doing anything that's hard in my life. So
exactly.
That's kind of where that one gets me. So
awesome.
Yeah, nice one, mate. It's like you know me already.
Fantastic. We're going to get to know you a lot more by the end of this podcast.
Let's see.
So tell me also, just how did you get into real estate? What was your first job? What sort of suburbs do you cover? What was it like getting into real estate and got you in?
Mate, I've only ever been at this office, I'll be honest with you.
Which office is that?
Starr Partners Blacktown. We now also own the Parramatta branch as well. So that was something that we'd done a few years back. But mate, it was just straight out of school, to be honest with you. I was no academic genius. I didn't think I was at the bottom of the barrel in terms of being a student either. But for me, I like the idea of sort of being, in and out of an office, not locked in an office all the time. And,
Yeah.
it really kicked off. I was working at Big W part-time at the time. And then the gentleman that used to own this business, I worked with his daughter-in-law at the time. And she's like, oh, what are you going to do when you leave school? I said, oh, no, I might give real estate a whirl. She's like, well, my father-in-law owns an office in Blacktown, funnily enough. I said, oh, can you see if you can get me a job?
Mm.
And then that was it. And I did that for about 18 months at the time. The sales assistants when I started was a guy that put the signs up and, ran the Homes Victoria books for the local news agencies and all that sort of stuff. And I said, this is not for me. I really wanted to get in sales at the time. This is 2004 I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And obviously at that time, everyone that was in sales was, 50 years old and had a million years experience, all that sort of stuff. So it wasn't quite the pathway for me at the time. So I went and did a few other bits and pieces, a bit of corporate, sold cars and all these wonderful jobs. And it was the whole sales thing really appealed to me, and I thought I was good at it. And then I'd made a friend in 2004 who worked here, and that's my now business partner. In 2009, he rang me back at the time. I was working for Optus at the time. And he said, look, I've just bought the business. Do you want to come back and work for me? And I remember saying to him exactly at that point in time, I was like, well, I don't know if I want to exactly come work for you, but all I do know is I don't want to keep doing what I'm doing. So let's give it a whirl. And that was it. 2009 was the second stint, been here ever since.
Fantastic. Well done. I mean, real estate is a great profession, and a lot of people don't see it as a profession. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't like real estate agents, but it's a great industry to be in because you're dealing with people's emotions and also their biggest point of decision making, where to live, what to buy. So you play a pivotal role. But I'm curious to know more about Western Sydney and get your insights into that. And love to ask you what you think what makes Western Sydney, I guess, an attractive market for both the investor and the home buyer. And what do you like best about the West?
Yeah, look, I was born in the West, so I was kind of forced to like it. You know what I mean? Look, the first word that comes to mind is affordability. Yeah, there's huge prospect for growth. And, even when I first started in that sort of 2009 through to 11, and there was heaps of first home buyer incentives, we got massive growth at that point in time. And then things continued to develop. And then what I call that 2015 to 17 boom really hit us at that point in time. And then, it's had a lot of ups and downs. But, I mean, it's an attractive area. I mean, where else can you go in Sydney where you can get, a good freestanding home on a nice block of land in a nice street with good schools around you, good connectivity for, roughly $1 million? It's very hard to find that. And I find that the people in this Western Sydney area typically work in the area, shop in the area, have family in the area, kids go to school locally, all that sort of stuff. So it's like a little hub. You don't really have to go anywhere.
Yeah, it's more localized. Yeah,
definitely. And when I find people buying in our suburbs, in the suburbs that we service here around Blacktown, when they're not from the area, let's say they're coming out from Ryde or Homebush or something like that, in a little apartment, and they want to have a base, I often will say to them, you'll be surprised at how convenient living in this area is. And I think you'll only learn that once you actually move here. Because working and living in the same area for me is awesome. But I know that living in my area, even where my family is based geographically, I'm very much at the center of everyone. I'm only sort of 20, 30 minutes away from anybody.
That's it.
Whereas other family members in the hills been travelling out to Penrith a little bit further, but I'm sort of halfway between the two. So, yeah, for me, affordability, connectivity, and obviously there's been heaps of development going on in the area with infrastructure and things coming in. So.
And where you basically focus and service, I mean, the Western suburbs is a massive market. You've got sort of from, how do you describe it? Box Hill, Riverstone in the far north, and then right out to Penrith, and then swing an arc round down to where the airport is. It's a massive market. But where you are, Blacktown's kind of a central hub, right? I mean, it's halfway between Penrith and Parramatta in a way, right? I mean, Parramatta's often been talked about as Sydney's second CBD, but how do you describe Blacktown?
Well, Blacktown will be the third biggest then. If Parramatta's the second. That's how I see it. Look, it's made up of a lot of suburbs around, and there can be small distances between the suburbs and huge distances between the suburbs. But yeah, Western Sydney can almost be divvied up into different precincts really, because you've got the northwest and southwest, and a lot of stuff happening in those growth corridors as well. But Blacktown is very, very central.
How have you seen property prices change? So let's talk about the last 5 years, and then we'll talk about the last 20 years. But particularly the last 5 years, like since COVID, what's happened? Give us some indication of how pricing's changed.
Yeah, I was only looking at one particular example on this earlier today, actually, because I just had the property settled. But
Mm.
there's one property that I sold in 2021. So just as sort of the whole COVID thing was really coming to light, and we were sort of well into that. Now, that property, it sold for 955 at that time in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
I just resold it, was just settled. So now for 1.3.
Wow. Mm.
So there's a 30% growth during those two times.
That's amazing.
It's crazy, isn't it?
That's it.
And then
Yeah.
had you said to me in 2009 when I first started that we'd be selling anything in Blacktown for $1 million, I would be, I would laugh at you. But that it's just the new norm now.
Yeah, that's
And
it.
obviously, as you said, as you mentioned, COVID had a huge impact on that.
Yeah, that's right. So we were, just in terms of our own business too, Mark, we've been buying properties for the last 25 years since we started, but Western Sydney was always been seen as a very, very cheap, affordable back in the day. So around Penrith, St Mary's, Colleton, we were buying houses. I think, I'm just trying to think of the year now, was it 2006 to 2009, somewhere around the $300,000 mark, for a good quality classic red brick, 3-bedroom red bricker. And then what we would do was add a granny flat. And back in the day, you could buy a granny flat for about even sort of 80 or 90 grand. And when you combine the rental income of that house plus the granny flat, we were getting 10, 11% yields. So we had clients that were able at the time, we're thinking, oh, should I buy a second one? And we said, absolutely. And, today, what are they worth today? Well, typically $1 million today, right? For those sort of properties. And they're still
what a great opportunity.
Yeah. And they're still delivering, fantastic yields today for those clients,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yield is one thing, capital growth is another. If you can get the two of those together, I mean, that's a beautiful recipe. And if you've got the income to help support that over a long period of time, I mean, the growth and it is in the riches come in the growth and the capital growth. That's what I think. I think that the yield is great because it helps you manage it and manage your finances, not compromising your life.
Correct.
But capital growth for me is everything.
So I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out, but tell me, are there any particular suburbs looking forward? We're now in 2025. We can't buy 10 years ago, 12 years ago, right? We can't do that. We can't go backwards. We can look forward. And that's part of why I'm doing this podcast today with you, to ask you as the local expert, what does the future hold? So if you, had a client that had roughly $1 million or maybe a bit more, and they're asking you, Mark, where do you think is going to be the best areas for capital growth? Any suburbs that you'd recommend?
I'd honestly just say anywhere between here and Campbelltown. I mean, Blacktown's always going to have good growth because it's, as we said, in my view, is it's the next biggest CBD after Parramatta. So I think that's still got a lot of continued growth. And when you see our median house price, where it stands today, it's still very affordable. It's still well below the average for Sydney. So that's a great thing. And then as you start to push out further to St Mary's and Liverpool and those sorts of areas closer to where the new airport is, I mean, that has to grow as well. I mean, reverse the clock back 20 years ago. I mean, if you bought a property that was close to Sydney Airport, I mean, look what that would have done. So I can only see that happen for the new airport. And that's a huge driving force in the western suburbs.
So how significant is this new airport? Like it's obviously having a huge impact on the Western Sydney market. I mean, there's big tracts of land that have been sold for industrial and other sort of non-residential purposes. But overall, how do you describe the significance of the impact of the Sydney Western Airport?
Huge. I mean, there's so much development going around. There's housing development, and there's road and infrastructure upgrades. There's new communities being built everywhere where there, was there was nothing but farmland. And that's a good thing for some people and not such a good thing for others. But I think as for Sydney and Western Sydney, that's probably been the biggest thing to help push our property market for areas that were otherwise stagnant for a number of years or decades.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing, massive impact, both on residential and commercial property values. But there's also, I guess, some unrealistic vendors out there. There's been a lot of blocks of land around Austral and Leppington that have been sitting there for years because the owners think they're on a gold mine, but there's going to be, still 3 to 5 years before they get water, power, sewage, all through them and before they can do it. So it is like a staged development. But I think overall, in my view, Mark, that the Western Sydney Airport is going to have a massive impact. That's just going to continue to grow in time. I mean, the fact that we can now have a 24-hour airport in Sydney that will be connected by train to the rest of the city. I think it's an absolute game changer for Western Sydney. It's brilliant. It just
I
makes it
couldn't
so much
agree with
more
you more.
connected. Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. I mean, think of that they're going to create a whole little city inside that area there. And I've taken a drive out there a little bit. And if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I think it's got so much growth around there that I've purchased a property that's close to those
There you
areas.
go. You put your money where your
So,
mouth is. There you go.
mate,
Mm.
I've been sick of giving people good advice for 20 years, and I never take it myself because I'm too busy trying to list and sell them.
Good on
And I
you.
thought, geez, I better do something myself. So yeah, I mean that's how much I believe it's going to change.
Excellent.
And
Yeah.
with all property, I mean, if you've got a long-term plan and
Mm.
you understand what your investment
Yeah.
strategy is, and you're
Mm.
clear about that, and you're honest with yourself in terms of what you're trying to achieve out of it,
Mm.
you should do well.
Mm. That's really good. Fantastic. And it's not just areas in Badgerys Creek. You know, I think as you mentioned Liverpool. That's like another major centre, and there's a lot of suburbs in between. But I think
Yeah,
for anyone listening to this podcast, we're not going to do a blow-by-blow description of all the 150 suburbs in the Western Sydney area. It is a matter of putting your skates on, getting your sneakers on, getting in your car and driving around these areas to get a feel for these areas. And you've got to really understand the dynamics and the demographics of who's buying, who's moving in, who's moving out, because some of these areas are extremely, well established. Some will have higher amenities than others. Some will have more green spaces and more parklands. Others will be more industrial. I mean, places like Fairfield, for example, and Villawood, where you've got, or Smithfield, for example, you've got a lot more, and Wetherill Park, all of those sort of logistical kind of real estate there. So they may not have the most attractive residential pockets, but you're not far from Bosley Park and other areas, or Green Valley, which have got some really nice pockets in them. So I think
yeah.
it's really important to understand, the types of properties you can buy and the amenity in those areas. Mm.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it on the other side as well, you take the example of a suburb like Luddenham with that Twin Creeks estate, that's a completely different kettle of fish altogether. Yes, it's far out, but it's more of a lifestyle opportunity for people, and it carries a average price of $2.5 million. So that's not going to be for everybody too, right?
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. And also it's important to exploit differences in the market. I mean, just another example is you've got Ropes Crossing, right? And yet, not far around the corner are some sort of what they call probably we used to be called less desirable suburbs like
Mm.
Mount Druitt, Wayland, Hassel Grove, Bidwell, lower demographic areas. But the differential between, say, Ropes Crossing, where you're paying, I can't remember what it is now, but you were basically buying land in there for what you were buying double the size block and houses outside of that estate. And it was
Yeah.
just because they'd put a pretty gate around it, which had a little mini shopping centre inside a community,
Mm.
So
Yeah.
don't fall for the shiny brand new house and land packages. If you're an investor, look beyond the shiny new thing and have a look at the established property market and see what you can find. Mm.
Yeah. And if I can add to that a little bit, I've got
Mm.
quite a bit of experience in selling in those areas. I've sold plenty of properties in Lethbridge Park and
Mm-hmm.
Mount Druitt over the years, and I've got some listings in those areas now. It's not only how close you are to the shops or how close you are to the station. There's things like, if you look at Mount Druitt, there has seemingly been an increase in the amount of people that are looking for things like the Islamic school there and the mosque and these sorts of things.
Right.
So these community people are making huge moves in there together and establishing beautiful little communities inside an area that once was not as desirable as what it may be now.
Mm.
And then, they make good use of the shops and they make good use of the connectivity there on the Great Western Highway and the M4. And, it's only 10 minutes out of Blacktown, really. It's only probably 20, 25 minutes out of Parramatta. It's not that far to go, and they're still creating a beautiful life for them. And as these communities move in big numbers, it increases the popularity, which then decreases the supply and then increases the demands, and then the prices go up with that as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, a lot of migrants coming to the country will want to congregate around, where their people of origin have come from. There might be an Indian community, an Islamic community, so
Yeah.
it's really important that people understand that there's good demand in those suburbs for that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Mark, tell me about rental yields. I know you work on the sales side of things, so I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you can answer this question, but how do rental
I do.
yields in Sydney compare to other parts of Sydney, do you think?
I only did a bit of research on this the other day. And if I can remember the numbers rightly, my memory's not that great. I often compare our area, Blacktown here, which is my core area, and I just pick a random suburb, for instance. And I recently did a comparison to say Balmain in the West and just sort of see where our yields hold up. And in some instances, or in both instances for houses and units, they were actually better. So I think it was something like, it was like $2.4 million for a house in Balmain, and it was roughly 2.5% yield or something like that.
Yep.
Whereas you come out to Blacktown and it was just over $1 million average price with nearly a 3% yield. And then the units were much better. I think we were up at like 5.5% for units, whereas theirs was around 3. So if you compare those, I know they might be a slightly sexier suburb and a more desirable lifestyle for some people, but as an investor, I mean, it's dollar in, dollar out. A lot of people are looking at that. And then if you look at, you know, our newfound gold mines of house and granny flats, I mean, if you look at an average price in our area of, say, $1.2 million now for a house and granny flat, getting $1,100 a week rent, that's nearly 5% yield just on that.
Exactly. 100% right. Yeah.
How do you argue?
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's the thing. You have to get a much higher outlay if you're going to buy even in the eastern suburbs or the North Shore or Northern Beaches compared to the western suburb of Sydney. You've got to pay 2 to 3 times the price, and you're getting half the yield in some cases. So it doesn't make financial sense as an investor to necessarily do that. So it makes a significant amount of sense to consider a number of areas in the western suburbs where you can potentially get multiple rental incomes from the one property, or even do a renovation or even do a development potentially down the track.
And have the opportunity to diversify your portfolio as well.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. So talk to me about timing. A lot of people ask me, Rich, when's a good time to buy? You know, is now a good time to buy? We've just had a 1 interest rate cut. We've still got, you know, potential issues with inflation. But do you think it's a good time to buy in Western Sydney right now? Where do you see the market at in Western Sydney? We really appreciate you tuning in to the Property Buyer Podcast, and I hope that you're finding our expert interviews helpful. So that we can keep providing this information and growing our audience, we rely on word-of-mouth recommendations. If you found this information useful, could I please ask you to share this podcast with your friends, family and colleagues, and ask them to subscribe to the Property Buyer Podcast. It would be a big help, and we'd be very grateful for your support. Thanks once again for sharing the links. And now let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, I do. I think the simplest answer is yes, it's a great time. I think my strategy, if I'm trying to educate a buyer or if I'm looking at trying to take my own advice, it's if you can afford it and you have a long-term vision on holding this property, i.e. 5 to 10 years minimum, buy any time. I try not to encourage people to try and pick the time. I know there's a lot of YouTube videos and TikToks about the property clock and all this sort of stuff, but I just think really old school on it. I mean, talk to somebody who bought a property 35 years ago in any area, irrespective of where it is, and see if they regret making that decision. And they'll always tell you they paid too much. They'll always tell you that the interest rates were 45%. They'll always tell you all these horrible stories about when they purchased, but they don't regret it now.
That's an absolutely fantastic advice. I'm so pleased you said that, because it's not necessarily about timing. Timing can play a role, but the best time to buy is when you can afford to buy. And as long as you've got a medium to long-term time horizon, you are going to do exceptionally well. Because if everybody tries to time it, you're going to have everyone pouring in like lemmings at the same time, right? So you're actually better off to almost be counter-cyclical and buy when people are not buying, because there's less competition out there. So
I agree, 100%.
And as we get more rate cuts, Mark, what's going to happen is it'll make prices slightly more affordable. Each 0.25% rate cut, you know, can add a significant amount of borrowing capacity for people, which then means more people can enter the market, which means more competition. So we still have a fundamental shortage of properties in this country. So there'll be more competition.
Yeah, I'll say 2 things on just that interest rate cut. I don't think on the front line, I haven't seen, you know, an absolute spike in the amount of people coming into the market. And yes, I think it has helped people. I think one of the greatest things, people have been longing for an interest rate cut for a long time now. So to finally get that, I think has just injected a whole heap of confidence into the market. I think we'll really start to see the effects of what you were just talking about, Rich, when we start to see maybe 2 or 3 interest rate cuts. It'll make a huge difference to affordability then. And hopefully we get to that point. I mean, I hope more than anybody else, as a lister and seller and as a property owner.
Yeah. Talk with me about if there's any other infrastructure projects that you, apart from the airport, are there any other major projects you're seeing in Western Sydney, and how do you think they're going to impact the
Yeah,
property market?
yeah, for sure. But I think, look, the government's got a big push on upgrading roads and that sort of stuff. And I know what we're trying to get away from the airport and it being the main thing, but I think everything that we're seeing in terms of development is being pushed around the airport. So,
Mm,
we've seen massive, I think there's something like $2.9 billion being injected
mm,
for road upgrades
yep.
over the next 10 years,
Mm,
mainly for M4 Northern Road and all that sort of stuff. And that's obviously because they're going to see, or they're expecting to see a lot of people make that move down towards where the airport is. But
mm,
I mean, recent times for us in our area, I mean, the beach over at Penrith was a huge thing,
yep.
right?
Yes.
As laughable as some people may think that is,
Mm,
but I know for those locals, that's a huge thing.
mm,
For us here in Blacktown, even just having something as the ACU Blacktown campus,
mm.
I mean, that did wonders for our market.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah.
So these are the things that will continue to push, and I hope we get other things, other developments and other upgrades that'll help continue to see our areas grow.
Mm. I mean, yeah, you're right. The road thing, the road network, you've got Badgerys Road upgrade, you've got Warrington Arteria Road, you've got Bringelly Road, Appin Road,
Mm.
the M12.
Yeah,
So all of those will increase connectivity and reduce travel time and congestion. And, I remember when the M2 first opened up out
mm.
to, was it Borkham Hills?
Yeah,
And it was interesting. I remember during that year, property prices um, in Borkham Hills jumped about 25 to 30% in 1 year, simply
yeah,
because it took 15 to 20 minutes off travel time to the city.
yeah,
So
yeah.
remarkable impact. So when people understand the impact of improved transport,
Mm.
it's huge. I mean, the other big one is the metro. So you've got the
Yeah.
metro train, and the various stations along the metro line have made a huge difference to commuters. And a lot of those commuters, they're not traveling in necessarily 5 days a week. They might be doing 3 days a week or 4 days a week. But having that ability to leave the car at home and not have to chew up petrol, they can read, they can relax, do work, listen to music on the train, and use an extremely reliable service makes a big
Mm.
difference to the commuting world.
Yeah. Well, I know of people that live in the city or in the outer city suburbs, and they use the metro to get into Norwest where they
Mm,
work, and vice versa, I'm sure.
mm,
And they only use their car on the weekends,
mm.
and
Yeah.
may not even do that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also a whole lot of new business hubs, Mark, that have been obviously being developed around the airport and also in the existing centres like Liverpool, Blacktown, Campbelltown. How are
Yeah.
those new business hubs and employment zones? What impact do you think they're going to have on the local property markets?
I think quite basically, I would say that if people have got more job opportunity in areas where they weren't before, and those job opportunities just happen to be in more affordable areas, that's going to increase then the popularity of those areas, and it's going to put pressure on supply and demand. More people are going to want to live there, and it's going to push the prices up.
Mm, mm,
But, one thing I do know is that people don't like to travel too much to work,
yep.
or within reason.
Mm.
They might travel 25 minutes, 30 minutes, but if you're getting sort of 60 minutes, an hour and a quarter, hour and a half to work, it just becomes too much for people.
Don't you
So,
reckon COVID's changed that number? I was about to ask you. You said 25 minutes right there as I was thinking it, but
mm,
there's absolutely this, what's the word, attraction to lifestyle now. We're all demanding that our jobs fit in more with our
yep,
lifestyle. We're all sick of the big commute. And obviously people are quitting jobs or moving closer if they like their work and really cutting down on what they call wasted time, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost an expectation. I mean, this is me as with the business owners hat on now. We know that as business owners, we need to be flexible with our staff. We need to support our mums, and we need to give them opportunities to have employment, but also to
Mm,
be able to be a mum and really get behind them genuinely to be able to do that.
mm,
So that's where, the whole work from home thing is almost an expectation, I think, from employees now. And that links directly into travel time.
yeah.
We've got one of our girls here that'll travel 45 minutes, but
Mm,
we have to work with her on her being able to pick the kids up and that sort
yeah.
of stuff. When you've got good staff, well,
Mm,
they'll
yeah.
pay you back in terms of the effort that they put in. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely think people are a lot less
Mm,
comfortable in spending huge amount of, as you said, wasted
mm,
time
mm,
getting to and from work, and it'd have to be a pretty damn good environment for them to put up with that,
mm. See
or
it.
pay
Yeah.
packet, one of the
Mm,
two.
mm. Let's talk about land supply and land releases and rezoning. Are there any kind of new land releases or rezoning proposals that have been implemented that you're aware of in Western Sydney? And what sort of opportunities do you think that might bring?
Yeah, more southwest Sydney, I think, is where you'll find all the land releases. I mean, probably about 10 or 15 years ago, we had some really good land releases out at Bungarraby and those sorts of things. The old Telstra land down the bottom of Bungarraby Road that sides now onto the Sydney Zoo. I mean, there was, I can't remember how many hundreds of blocks were released there. And I remember at the time thinking, geez, who's going to live there?
Mm.
You know, but it's been a wonderful development and they did it really, really well. But I mean, obviously now you're probably having to go out more around Narella and Austral, Tarmor, more around the southwest to get those blocks. Austral, there's been heaps of land released around there. And, again, they're creating community, so people are buying it. We often see a lot of people moving out of our area to take advantage of those land releases, either to build the house of their dreams or to take advantage of the school that's been built there or whatever it is. I mean, Marsden Park, do we need to talk about that?
Yeah,
Marsden
absolutely.
Park was
Please.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, there'd be thousands of homes in there.
Yeah.
And, what was once the sticks, you now got its own community and parks and cafes and 2 new schools and Costco and IKEA, and they don't have to leave. And then couple that with people's ability to work from home. I mean, why wouldn't you take that opportunity?
And what block size are those ones at Marsden Park? Roughly, do you
The
remember?
bigger blocks in the early stages were around that sort of 450, 500. They're getting a lot smaller than that now. They're in the 300s.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of terrace housing and that sort of stuff over there as well. So opportunities for various parts of the market. I think, as always, bigger blocks of land are always going to be more popular, but it's going to come down to each person's affordability, what they want to build, what they want to buy, what they've sold, how much money they've got. All those things will play a part.
Interesting. I mean, even Rouse Hill, there's some huge apartment develops around Rouse Hill Station because they're building, quite a big hospital facility and a whole integrated village around that area. And then, a lot further, like you say, in the southwest around Austral and Campbelltown and those sort of areas, Cobbity, there are some sort of much bigger blocks. There's blocks where there's almost acreage subdivisions.
Definitely.
But that's where you've got to go. You've got to go between there and almost the Southern Highlands to get that feeling of being in a semi-rural environment.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It just depends what people want,
Yeah, well, if you want a regular block, I mean, let's not forget there was, huge land releases out of Box Hill and those sorts of areas. The Gables, all those.
The Gables,
huge. And I mean, that's just siding onto Kellyville and McGrath's Hill and all those sorts of areas. And, people still very much see that as an extension of the hills, really. So they've been incredibly popular. And the prices that people are paying for blocks of land out there are ridiculous.
Tell me about the demographic profile of Western Sydney and how you think it's evolved over the past decade. So, what sort of people groups are moving in? Who really likes to come into the area?
Well, mate, I always joke about it. Like, I've been in Blacktown my whole life, right? And I still live here now by choice. Judge me if you will. But, I jokingly say that when I first started in real estate or even, in my teen years, it was an area where you sort of bought when you had no money to buy anywhere else. Whereas now people are making the choice to stay here and we are seeing more professionals and local business owners and well-established people with great jobs. And there's less housing commission around the area, a lot of those being sold off and redeveloped. And, families, we've got great schools around here now and schools with opportunity classes and people trying to give their kids really great education. They can get that out in that area now. So I just find we are getting people, for lack of a better term, better quality people. And I don't mean to say that by any means of disrespect at all, but people are choosing to live here as opposed to being forced to live here just based on affordability, albeit it's still very affordable.
It's a really good point you make because there is always prejudice between different locations. People think the eastern suburbs are a certain set, or people think, the people in the Central Coast are a certain type way, or Western Sydney. But it's why I ask this question of all my guests, because the demographic, don't judge a book by its cover. If you go and visit some of these places, you'll find some absolutely thriving communities in Western Sydney. And as you say, people aren't desperate to get out. Some people are desperate to get in for whatever reason. There's different drivers. It might be the schools. It might be family connections. It might be a particular ethnic or religious group. And so all of those are key drivers. So if you're both either a home buyer or investor listening to this podcast, bear that in mind. It's not like there's slim pickings on which suburb is any good. There's a myriad of fantastic suburbs. And they've also changed their status as well, haven't they? I mean, are there any particular locations you think have really improved their sort of social standing in the last decade?
Blacktown, without doubt.
Yep. There you go. Yeah.
You know, that is the biggest example, I think, for me.
Mm, mm,
It's an area that was once the only affordable option for people,
mm.
and it's now very quickly becoming unaffordable for a lot of people. And
So,
hence we're seeing people being pushed out to Doonside,
mm,
Marion,
mm.
Dean Park, and the
Yep.
popularity of those, you know, little sisters of Blacktown
Mm,
have increased profoundly in the
mm,
last even 5 years. I mean, look at Marion was a great example.
mm,
Great schools in there. My kids go to school in Marion.
mm-hmm.
It's about 12 minutes away from my house,
Yep.
has its own station. Just beside that, you've got what was a new estate. It was probably like a 25-year-old estate there in Woodcroft with a
Mm,
lake and shops. And
yep.
me, it's crazy.
Mm, yeah. It's fascinating. Are there any other suburbs, either nearby or further afield, that you think are in really high demand from buyers at the moment for any particular reasons?
St Mary's, obviously.
Hmm.
You know, St Mary's is
What's driving that, do you think?
the direct link into the airport.
The
You know,
train. Yep.
that train line going
Yep.
straight into the airport, of course. You know, I remember saying probably 12 to 15 years ago, and people saying, like, where can you get something on a good block of land for, you know, at the time it
Mm,
was like 270,000. I'm like, if you
mm,
go out to St Mary's
mm.
and just buy as many 1,000 square metre blocks as you possibly can out there and hang on to them, something's got to happen. Lo and
Yeah.
behold, this airport comes up
Yeah.
with a direct link from St Mary's.
Mm,
I mean, heaps of R3 zoning around there.
yeah.
You know, so the potential for development around townhouses and that sort of stuff, you can't get it as
Mm,
commonly in,
mm,
say, Blacktown, for instance, with the 2015 LEP changes here. They really went away from a lot of R3, but they blessed us with a lot of R4 stuff.
mm.
So St Mary's is the key one for me.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I'd definitely second that. I was about to say, if you didn't mention it, I was going to mention it as well, because
There you go, on the same wavelength.
we have positioned a lot of clients, particularly when that new station, or the new connection, I should say, from St Mary Station was announced. Absolutely. Literally, I spoke to a lot of agents not long after that, and they said the phone was ringing off the hook for opportunities.
Yeah,
You know, so
yeah, definitely.
yeah,
Definitely.
fascinating. What else can I ask you, Mark? So what about, I guess, property types? Like when you think of Western Sydney, you don't generally think of high rise, but what are the typically the most in-demand property types? Give us a rundown on the property profile, if you like, of townhouse, apartments, terraces. What do you see most of? What do you think's good?
Look, specifically for me, I'm finding anything with a good block of land that either has some sort of development potential. I mean, try and find a 600 square metre corner block in Blacktown now, Blacktown Seven Hills,
Mm,
you know, that you can do a DA subdivision for two lots. Like
mm,
they've all been developed. They're so hard to find. So anything
yeah,
with that development potential,
mm,
and obviously anything that you can build a granny flat on to get that second income. I mean, that's
yeah,
single-handedly the most popular part of our market.
mm,
Anything that has the ability to have a dual income on it,
mm,
specifically for investors, that's all they're looking for, I
mm,
find.
mm.
So that would be probably the most in-demand type of property.
Yeah, great. And what about interstate buyers? Are you seeing many people looking to buy from other states coming into Western Sydney or from overseas?
Probably the other way around, to be honest
Mm,
with you.
mm,
I'm seeing a lot of investors looking at what we have to offer here and then venturing out to, say, Brisbane,
mm,
Perth,
mm.
you know, and investing further afield than in their own sort of backyard.
Interesting. Yep.
I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at Perth as one example, right? They've got an average price of 740 odd thousand with an average 5% yield,
Mm,
and it's had over 23% growth in the last 12 months.
mm. Not
Now,
sustainable, but yeah, it's massive.
I was going to
Mm,
say, whether it's
mm,
sustainable or not is a different story, but those sorts of prospects are what's attracting people to invest further
mm,
afield.
mm,
But yeah, I have sold, I'd probably say a dozen properties to people from interstate.
mm.
I've
Okay.
sold to people from overseas. Most recently, I had a random WhatsApp call from Sri Lanka, and I thought, this is a spam for sure, and I answered it. And it was genuinely a person who lived in Sri Lanka looking to fly to Australia to buy a property and go back home.
Mm.
Why I even answered that call, I have no idea. And it was a lovely guy to deal with, I'll be honest with you. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, look, it
fantastic.
doesn't happen frequently, but it does happen.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. I think you're right. A lot of locals in all parts of Sydney are looking to buy interstate when they realise that Sydney is, they've already got a place here, so they want to diversify into other states.
Mm.
I think Perth will definitely slow down over the next 2 years. It's not going to have as nearly the rate of growth. So I'd be very cautious about that market. The other markets that I'd be bullish on outside of Sydney would be Adelaide, Brisbane, and Melbourne, particularly.
Mm.
Brisbane's got much higher yields. It typically gets yields closer to 5% as well, where you can still buy, a good quality house from between 750 to $1 million quite easily. And Melbourne's median price it's now at $1 million as well. But it hasn't had the growth. It's been very sluggish. So I think Melbourne will definitely jump up the next 3 to 5 years. So that's a good market to be getting into. And Adelaide's always one of those little, what I call, under the radar performers. It's had strong population growth, very attractive lifestyle. So I think it will continue to grow.
Yeah, I've
So,
had two of my clients in the last 2 years make permanent moves interstate. I think one went to South Australia, one went to Western Australia, just for a better quality life.
Yeah, there you go. Now, I think I've already asked you this question, but what lifestyle and community developments are making Western Sydney more attractive to buyers? You mentioned Marsden Park before, but are there any other kind of community and lifestyle developments you think are attracting buyers to the area?
Look, I think just as we previously mentioned, I think it's a number of things. So, like we touched on the ACU Blacktown campus. I mean, that gives people purpose to buy here and stay here. We've had huge upgrades in our shops and roads and, great quality schools now, whereas I'll give you one example. Blacktown Boys and Blacktown Girls High School. So in the very early 2000s, late 90s, when I was in school, they had a terrible reputation. Now both of those schools are semi-selective and people are selling their souls to send their kids there.
Classic. Yeah.
So it's those sorts of things. I think as a whole, I don't think it's one specific thing that's bringing people to the area or getting them to invest in the area. I think Western Sydney, Blacktown specifically, just has a number of positives and a number of check boxes that will help an investor or a home buyer say, you know what, that looks like the right move for me.
And how important is the hospital? Like, Blacktown Hospital has always been known as a central hub, but hospitals, I think, are a really key driver for people in the area, right?
Again, I use the same example. Imagine having bought a property within 5 minutes walk to Westmead Hospital 20 years ago. Where would you be today?
Yeah,
and Blacktown's definitely heading that way. Look, there's heaps of development and rezoning going in around the hospital, and we know that. There has been huge upgrades to the hospital itself, and even as recently as 8 or 9 years ago when my daughter was brought there, it's not the same place today as what it was back then. I mean, now we've got the university attached to it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, but it might be the head of midwifery in there as well. It's like there's so much going on there, and it just looks better. This is the thing. If we can just make it look that little bit more attractive, it'll help increase its popularity. But yes, the hospital is a huge driver.
So, Mark, we've been talking a lot about really positive things about the West, and I'm not asking you to pour cold water on it, but are there any risks that you think a buyer, either a home buyer or investor, should be aware of if they're thinking about buying into the Western suburbs?
Look, I think the biggest risk for any person investing, not only in this area, but any area, is just not being aware of what your strategy is. So I will often have people ring me up, on the front line, go, look, I'm looking for an investment. What have you got for me? And I'll be like, okay, what's your strategy? And it's not a trick question at all. I just really want to understand these people. A lot of them have no idea. I mean, when I say strategy, I mean, are we looking for capital growth? Do you have a high income and you need something with a lot of outgoings to help sort of offset your taxable income? Like, what are you looking for? Because anything, if you hold it long enough, is going to be a good investment for you. However, the risk is not being aware of exactly what you're doing. And sometimes people just fake it till you make it, and that's okay. And time will heal any errors around that. But yeah, I just think it's not being aware of what you want to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point you make about strategy. I spend a lot of my time on the phone with our clients actually developing a strategy with them. And that's part of the reason they come to us as a buyer's agent, to help them create a strategy that's going to work for their individual situation. Because there's not a one size fits all. You pointed out, someone on a high income, they have the ability and actually need to negative gear. Someone on a more low to moderate income, they're going to need to get something that's neutrally geared or even positively geared. So and also people may not have the education or backing or risk factor to do a development. So don't go and do that first straight off the bat thinking you're going to make $1 million from your first buy. Make sure you get a strategy that fits within your financial capacity and within your risk profile, But in the Western suburbs, like, we don't have too many areas that are flood prone, do we? Or places that get subsidence from mines. Are there any areas like that you think that people should be aware of?
No, not really. There's a bit of area in Blacktown that sort of would be the old 1 in 100 flooding. And, councils, I think, just in the last couple of years had a bit of a refresh on what they determined to be flood prone areas and all that sort of stuff. But it's not a huge consideration for most people around here. I know there's a bit of flood prone land over at Land Dialo, but, you're buying 5-10 acres out there. It's a different kettle of fish altogether.
Yeah. We're just very fortunate. I mean, our hearts go out to the people in Lismore and the Northern Rivers areas. Obviously, have just been devastated by Cyclone Alfred, but fortunately, we don't tend to get cyclones this far south in Sydney. But I think, yeah, if you are buying any kind of property, always make sure you do your checks and balances and get those environmental checks done as well.
And particularly those people buying around the Hawkesbury, right, and Windsor.
Yes, exactly.
We've seen what happened, in there in the last couple of years as well. So it's definitely a very strong consideration depending on where you are buying.
Are there any other mistakes that you see buyers make when they're thinking about Western Sydney?
Yeah, not pulling the trigger quick enough, talking themselves out of buying it.
Asking their parents for advice and friends and family for advice. Yeah,
it's the Uncle Billy's of the world. Uncle Billy bought a property in 1923, hasn't done it since, yet he knows everything about it. I mean, I think what they've got to do is they've got to establish a relationship with an agent. They've got to make sure that they are known to the agent as being a good buyer and being there and being on the ball. I don't think they can rely only on the buyer's agent helping them. I don't think they can rely only on the agent helping them. I think they've really got to grab the bull by the horns and make it their priority to say, okay, well, I want to invest. I'm going to dedicate some time to my research. I'm going to dedicate my time to be out there looking to find out what I like and what I don't like. And get the right support network around you. Have the right broker, have the right buyer's agent, have the right real estate agent, and follow the market. And long before you're actually ready to pull the trigger, be out there researching.
And interestingly, I have to ask you, what's been your experience in working with buyer's agents? Have you, and would you recommend anyone work with a buyer's agent?
Yeah, I love working with buyer's agents. I think there's some really good ones out there at the moment. The first encounter I had with a buyer's agent was probably 10, 12 years ago. And there was one guy, for the life of me, I can't remember his name now, but I enjoyed working with him because he had the common goal in mind, which was to get the deal done. He would support his buyers in the right way. He would ensure that a fair deal was achieved and we could all work honestly together and speak openly and candidly about getting the right result, both for the seller and the buyer. I would absolutely encourage. I think especially if you haven't got the know-how, especially if you're time poor, especially if you're venturing outside of your backyard to invest, get professional help. It's worth the money.
Fantastic. Yeah, wonderful. Look, my last question for you. You've been a wealth of knowledge today, Mark. This has been fantastic, but I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out. Do you have any predictions for the Western Sydney property market over the next 5 to 10 years? Where's it going? How much is it going to rise by? Why should we buy there?
Growth is everything. It's going to grow. How much is going to grow by? I don't know. I hope 10 million%. That's my hope.
It won't be that
personally
high.
And professionally. It certainly won't.
Yeah.
But as close to that number as we possibly can. There's heaps of growth. We've still got plenty of up to find. We will have absolutely no dramas in seeing prices go very well. I think if we can sort out this interest rate stuff, I think if the airport's in full swing, and if I'm not mistaken, it's only next year that we're due to start getting some traffic through there.
Absolutely. Yep. The leases have been locked in with the airlines. So there's about 3 or 4 airlines they've got agreements with. So they're ready to go.
Yeah, all over it. I mean, that's a huge thing. So we've got plenty of movement upwards. I think if you've got an opportunity where you can invest, if you can release some equity, if you've got a bit of a risk appetite to say, you know what, I'm gonna do this, you can't lose. I don't think you can lose if you've got the patience to see the cycle through.
I reckon there's 4 reasons, in my view, someone should consider the Western Sydney property market. Number 1 is affordability. Secondly, the massive infrastructure development that's still ongoing and will continue to grow with roads, rail, hospitals, schools, etc. Thirdly, jobs. So many more jobs are being created, not just the aeronautical centres, but all those employment hubs, logistical centres, all feeding off all the major roads there. And fourthly, the community dynamic. Like you mentioned, it's a real thing that stood out to me today from the community spirit and how people are not moving out of the area. They're desiring to stay and move within the area to just get better properties. So, Mark, I've done analysis of property prices for all the major capital cities over the last 25 years. And the average rate of capital growth for Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne was between 7.5 to 8% per annum. So if we go back to 2005, the median Sydney house price back then was, drumroll, $400,000. So we fast forward 20 years and our median house price now in Sydney is $1.4 million. So, just consider buying, say, a $1.2 million house now that's got, potentially a flat, that will should double in value to 2.4 or 2.2 within 7 to 10 years. So, money's going to be lost to those that hesitate, but to those that can see the opportunity, I think Western Sydney, has a great future. Any final thoughts, Mark, from you?
I was just gonna elaborate on that last point that you said. I mean, and this is probably a bit of advice from me personally. I mean, we all
please.
go through the hardship of holding property, especially if you're coming up with a shortfall and you're making certain financial sacrifices in life to keep this investment property alive, and constantly paying the mortgage and the repairs and the dealing with the tenant issues and all that sort of stuff. You've just got to stay true to your plan and just know and believe that it'll all come together at some point. Don't hesitate at that sort of 3 or 4 year mark when it starts to become hard and you haven't seen much capital growth. You're like, why did my mate buy a property and it went up 400,000 in a year? Don't listen to all that. Just stay true to yourself. Hang on to it. It will come for you.
Really good point. I just wrote the word down, patience, as you were saying that, because I actually deal with a lot of impatient investors. It's like they think it's a slot machine, put money in, get money out tomorrow.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. You do have to ride the wave and the ups and downs. Yes, you might have to change property managers. Yes, you might have to fix the air conditioner in the front door a few times, right? That's just part of the course. Being a property investor requires a little bit of effort, not too much effort, but the other thing I'd say, Mark, is that when you hold a property for longer than 10 years, that second 10-year period, the capital growth is astronomical. And then the third, what I call trimester, once you get from year 20 to year 30, it's unbelievable. So please, anyone listening, do be patient, do get into the market and hold for the long term and have that long-term view.
And the rents are obviously improving year on year as well. As well. That's it. The other thing I will say as well is partner with a good property management team, somebody with experience, with as little staff turnover as you can possibly have, which is very difficult in a property management team. But pick the right property manager. It will make all the difference.
Absolutely.
A percent here or there has got nothing to do with, how good that they can manage that property for you. Make sure your routine inspections are getting done. Make sure they've got all the knowledge to be able to handle difficult situations. Make sure the communication skills with both yourself and the tenant are up to scratch. That's a huge thing as well, because they're going to be a huge part of your property investment journey.
Yeah. Look, Mark Vella from Starr Partners at Blacktown, can I say thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today. It's been really helpful and it's been a delight to chat with you today, Mark.
Thanks, mate. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you.
Thanks again. Thank you, everybody, for listening again to another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast. We'll be back in touch with you again. Thanks for being with us on another Property Buyer Podcast. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please click on the SpeakPipe link and we'll answer this during the next episode. If you're looking to buy a residential or commercial property in the near future and would like to get the added advantage of having a buyer's advocate on your side, then please reach out to my team today and send us your inquiry and we'd be delighted to help. Please visit our website at propertybuyer.com.au where you can stay updated with all my latest market updates, weekly blogs and live suburb profiles to help you make better property decisions. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next Property Buyer Podcast.